Good evening, everyone. This is Celeste from the New Haven Free Public Library in another session with Page, our software development, and with the sessions of creating a game series. This is going to be one of our last sessions for this create a game, but we're going to come back on May with more new content. And I'm going to be taking a look at the chat if you guys have any questions. So please just raise your hand or write something on the chat if you have to. The same for Facebook page. I turn it to you.
Cool. Thank you, Celeste. Yeah. I don't have too much intro with. Just a reminder that I have office hours still every Monday from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. You can go to this link on Calendly and you can sign up for a block, or you can just email me at using coder@nhfpl.org, and I can answer questions about programming, general programming topics, or anything of interest like that. I'm really happy to answer all kinds of things. So yeah, send anything my way. So this is the homepage for the series. This is, like Celeste said, this is the last one. So yeah, this is the last of this series, April 7th. So if you go to the homepage, you can click this session and it'll pull up these nice looking notes, which you can follow along with. They're pretty long today, but most of this stuff is just sort of quick instruction. But I did want to kind of cram a lot in because the game is done with this session. So we have a kind of a fun looking completed game if we can get through all this. So yeah, if you want to follow along, basically what you'll do is you'll click this folder here. You would go to the top right. Well, no, you wouldn't do that. You would, what would you do? I think you could, you should be able to, oh wait, you know it. I know it's the easiest. Yeah, so you'd go right here to the home page, and you just click download zip, and then you would just use this space game folder, and then you would use the Godot engine that we've been using so far, and then you could open the project and follow along. So if you want to do that, feel free. But otherwise, yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. So basically, we've done a lot to this game so far. It has a handful of different mechanics that we've introduced. And what we want to do to finalize the game is make it so that the player can go to some point in the level and end the game. We also want to tell them that the game is over. And we can also use the same kind of logic that we write for doing that to tell them that the game has started, because we hadn't done that yet. And we can tell them that they lose when they lose. And that will pretty much conclude the basics of the game. Okay, so again, I always like to do this, especially when making something like a game or on a large project, is review the objective. So, you know, we set out, we made this objective to begin with, and we want to hit all of the things on that list of objectives. But it's also helpful for us so that we know that we're not kind of reaching past any objectives. We're not doing more than we set out to do to begin with. So the idea was that, you know, this is just a snippet of it, but we want to stick to what is not slime in this game. So slime hurts us, but we have to escape this maze of slime and obstacles. And we're going to move blocks that are not slime to do so. So right here, we have to escape this maze. So far, the player has not had a way to escape the maze. They can just run around the maze. They can move the blocks and dodge the slime and avoid obstacles, but they weren't able to escape. So we need to add kind of an escape route. So we need to make like an end game position. So we also want to be able to place this in the level so that the player can find it. Probably want it to be observable because the player needs to know why they should navigate the maze and what to do within the maze. You know, if we didn't make it observable, oh, hi, Kasar. Thanks for joining. Yeah, so if they didn't know what to do in the maze, then it would be kind of pointless to add an objective. So we also want to make it challenging, obviously, which we'll talk about a little bit with this section for creating a puzzle. Again, this looks really long, but it's not too bad. I just wanted to be really detailed. So if you get lost, you can follow along pretty easily. Yeah, so, and then obviously the point of reaching this objective is that it ends the level, it ends the game in our case. All right, so first of all, we're going to open Godot, which is our game engine editor platform. I have my folder stored here, so I'm just going to open it up by double clicking it. If you hadn't opened one before, you'd have an option to load. If you downloaded it from the homepage here, this is what the game will look like when you open it up. So we have our slime obstacles, which hurt the player. We have our just general obstacle that is immovable, and then the player collides with it. And then we have movable obstacles like these movable crates that the player can shift around the level to kind of navigate successfully. So, and then we have our surrounding area, the tile map, which it confines the player in our level. And then we have the player themselves, obviously. So what we're going to do is add a new scene, a new type of node in here that the player will have to come in contact with to end the game. So that's what we're going to do. So following these instructions here, the gist is that we're going to make a new scene. We're going to give it a sprite and everything like that. We're going to give it a shape to collide with. We're going to make it so that it's collidable. And then we're going to save that to the level. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So first things first, I'm going to go to scene at the top left. I'm going to click new scene. I'm going to use for the basis of the scene, I'm going to use this node called a 2D area, or it's actually an area 2D. Okay. So this area 2D is basically just going to be a box in 2D space. And you can see when I hover over it, it kind of describes what this is. So it's 2D area for detection and physics and audio influence. So this is nice because it's just basically a space. We don't want it to like really interact with the physics system or anything. It doesn't need to like really have collisions per se. It just needs to know when the player character has entered that space, because then they've won the game. So it's going to be pretty basic. So I'm going to create that. I'm going to go ahead and immediately rename it by double clicking. I'm just going to call it objective. So this is our objective. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a sprite right here in the instructions. So you can load a texture from the art directory that we've saved with the project. We've got a couple different sprites in there. So yeah, if you load one from there, there should be a couple of different options. So let's take a look. First thing I'm going to do though is add the sprite node to start with. So create a sprite. I'm going to go over to the inspector on the right-hand side, and I'm going to load a texture. Let's see. I'm going to click load. Okay. So I'm loading a texture for my sprite, going into this art directory. I already have all these assets, which again are available for download on the site. You can see where I got them to in some of the previous notes if you're curious. We've already used some of these sprites, but the one we have not used is this one, this nice looking staircase. So I think this will work really well for basically an escape, something that looks like we're escaping or leaving. So I think this is pretty nice. Yeah, so let's try it out. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You'll notice it's really small. We encountered this problem before with some of our other sprites, so I'm going to take a look at those. That's kind of another practice I kind of try to stick to is just referencing existing objects that I have or that I put together for just consistency, because you don't want to have to do, you don't want to make the same mistakes repeatedly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a look at the slime obstacle in the editor here. And for the animated sprite, I just wanted to look at the size. So we scaled it by 3 in the X and the Y direction. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. Under transform, set the scale to 3. Okay, and that looks much more appropriate. That looks more like what we're used to as far as size goes. Okay, so once we're done with that, we can add a collision shape, which is basically going to define the region that the player interacts with. So the sprite alone, the player can't interact with. It's just for the graphics subsystem to render. We're actually going to add a shape for the physics engine to kind of acknowledge. So let's go ahead and add that collision shape 2D, double click it. All right, so what we need to do is add a shape for this. Be a rectangle shape is probably our best bet. This looks pretty good, the default collision shape size. Oh yeah, here we go. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I don't want to go right up against the border of the image because I think that can cause some problems. And we also kind of want to make it look like the character is entered. We don't want it to just hit the border and then disappear. Actually, so in that respect, we could make it smaller. But I don't know. I like to like play with stuff like this and then see how it goes. Okay, so our shape looks good, I think now. It covers most of the sprite, so it'll make sense in the game. All right, now we're gonna set the layer and the mask. So the layer and the mask properties, this is basically what is going to dictate valid collisions with different objects in the game. So if you remember, if you were looking at the last session notes, we talked a lot more about this, but it's basically just going to dictate what collides with what sees what in the game. So we don't want everything to see everything in the game, all of our little systems, because that would overcomplicate a lot of interactions. So we want to limit the interactions that are available. Okay, so basically to do that, we'll click the objective root node. This is the root node in the scene. And we'll go over to, I think it's going to be collision. What I want to do is basically create a new layer just for this, this objective. So it's going to sit in layer 5. Yeah, we can go ahead and save a new layer for this as well in the project settings if we want to do that. The only things that should interact with it are the castaway, which is the player character. So yeah, we can just leave it with this, but the castaway and movable, actually, yeah, I'm going to say no, do not let it interact with movable objects. Because then the player can win by pushing a box into here, which may not be ideal. Maybe it is though. You could experiment with that. But I think for this, I'm going to say that they yeah, just do the castaway. I think that makes more sense. Okay, so let's go to project settings and add this new layer so that it comes up for us. So go to 2D physics. You can see all these other layers that I already have. I'm going to add a layer called objective. And just close that. So you should see that it comes up here. I might have to click away. Yeah, there it goes. Okay, so we just set the layer to be the objective, and that's where this is going to sit in the game. Okay, last thing we're going to do, we're going to have to set the Z index to -1 on this objective sprite so that the castaway appears above it. But before we just go ahead and do that, let's go ahead and save it. Save the scene. I'm going to go ahead and add an instance of it to the planet. Actually, let me do one last thing, which I didn't mention. You should make sure the object's children are not selectable. Just FYI. The reason you should do that is because otherwise you can drag the collision shape around, and we don't want that. We want to leave the collision shape. Oh no, is it not going to let me undo that? Well, that's annoying. Okay. Well, I will put it back very carefully. I think that's right. Huh. Okay. Well, that's why you want to do that. So you don't accidentally do what I just did. Okay, so then that way we can just move this object around and it doesn't move all the children of it, which can be kind of annoying with more complicated nodes or scenes. So we'll lock that, and then we'll add a child instance to the level. So you'll see it appears at the top left. I'm going to go ahead and put it somewhere that's difficult for the player to get to. So currently the player character is appearing here, but they're actually going to start the game here because of a script that I wrote. So I'm actually just going to move the castaway over here so that it's a little more clear when we're designing our level. So somewhere that would kind of be difficult for the player to get to, maybe like right here, because I don't think the player is going to be able to successfully go through these slimes so easily. So maybe that makes sense for it to be like here. This is a bit tricky, at least. They probably have to move the box. Okay, so let's try that. And maybe move it a little bit more. Yeah. Okay, so we'll try that. We'll save it. Let's see what happens. I mean, first of all, we know that this isn't going to end the game or anything because we didn't add any script logic for this area, this staircase, to do anything. So it's not going to do anything. It's just something that we can approach. But I want to show you what it looks like with just the settings we have for the sprite. So I moved my box out of the way, move this box. You'll notice the player character goes underneath the stairs. So we don't want that. That's because of the way the sprite is configured. So we want to fix that if possible. Okay, so the way we're going to do that is basically modify this Z index. So if you go to the objective root node here, actually, I think if you go to the sprite, no, let's do it. Yeah, we'll do it on the root node. I think you could do it on the sprite, to be honest. I don't think it would matter. If you do it on the sprite, whichever way you prefer, you can do it on the sprite or you could do it on the root node. I will do it on the sprite because I think if you think about this, it's a rendering problem. It's not a physics problem or anything like that. So I don't really want to mess with the physics, like what plane the character is on. I just want it to render below. So we'll set the Z index to -1 here. So the Z index, if you're thinking of an XY plane, let's say X is going this way, Y is going this way, Z would be going up and down. So if we're looking at our 2D game like this is X, Y, and then Z is coming in and out. So we want this image to sit behind the character. So when the character is moving, so this will be -1. So the character will move over it. So let's take a look and see what that looks like now that we saved that. So I'm gonna, oh, I died. So I'm gonna move this box out of the way. Okay, so now the character is over the stairs. So the character appears over the stairs, which looks a little more natural. If I was like really polishing this game and things like this, one thing that, you know, I might do, which we're definitely not going to do because we don't have time to do stuff like this. But if you're like an artist and that's why you're getting into game development, or you're a designer, you're coming at it more from that perspective and you're just kind of learning about the code on the back end, you might basically add a custom animation for this event. So that's something you can do in Godot, for example. So once I enter this area, we could add a custom animation that would get rid of this sprite and kind of, you would add a new sprite of the character going down the stairs maybe, and it would just animate that. Because this doesn't look great. I mean, it kind of looks like, you can see the, I can zoom this in. You can see how there's the black from our character sprite kind of overlapping with the stairs, and it doesn't look really like they're going down the stairs. So that would be kind of a nice thing to do if you were able to achieve that as like an animator. But I'm not an animator, so I will not be doing anything like that. Okay, so we have a nice looking objective for the most part. We've already saved the scene. We've added it to the level. So now what we want to do is basically make this end the game. Currently, it just appears on the screen. It doesn't really do much for us. So what we want to do is basically determine when the player character collides with the boundary of the objective. We'll emit a signal. So we'll produce a signal that says that they've entered the objective. And then in the level, we'll respond to that signal by ending the game. So that's what we want to do. Okay, so first part of that, we're going to try to emit this signal. So the easiest way to do this is to make a new script for the objective. I'm just using an empty template. It's going to inherit area 2D because that's what this scene is. It's an area 2D. And I'm just going to hit create. That's good. So it's going to just start us with this, which this is what it was talking about when it said it inherits area 2D. It basically just gives us access to all the properties of this area 2D node type in Godot. So I'm going to go ahead and start making additions here. We're going to add a new signal when we open up the script. We're going to call it reached. So signal reached. So that's what the signal is called. So basically, we're going to emit the signal that says reached. So the objective emits a signal called reached. You could call it what you want, but I feel like I like to make objectives with respect, or I like to make these signals with respect to the broadcaster of the signal. So the objective would say to someone, you have reached me. The slime obstacle, for example, or no, I'm sorry, the castaway, for example, has a signal called hit. So you have hit me. That's just kind of, yeah, one approach to doing it. But you can definitely name these what you like. There's no just stick to a convention. So stick to the way that you do it. Okay. So once I've done that, I'm going to select the root node from the scene tree. And I'm going to open the node tab over here on the right, and I should see my signal added, which I do. Here it is. It's called reached. Yeah, so we're going to ignore that one for now, though, and we're going to mess with this one, body entered. So what we're looking at is basically all of the signals that this objective scene is able to handle. And basically what this one is saying is, hey, you are an area 2D node. The area 2D node is aware of a handful of different events. And so body entered is one of those events. We're going to respond to that event in our script. So we're going to go ahead and connect to it like that. So I just double clicked it and then I connected. Okay, and we're going to add the following code to this script. So what this is basically our way of broadcasting the signal using signals from within the scene. You don't really have to worry so much about that conceptually, but whoops. try that again. There we go. Okay, so I just copied and pasted this code, but it's not too complicated. You could write it out manually. So the effectively what we're going to do is when somebody enters this objective, we're going to emit this signal, which says the objective was reached. And then what we're also going to do really quick is just disable any collisions on the objective. The reason to do that is because we don't want to have other colliding bodies then process with the objective after that. There's no point really. If someone's reached the objective, then it's over. We don't need to do anything else. So go ahead and disable collisions. We can call it a day. Okay. So after we've done that, we're broadcasting the signal effectively. We're pretty much done with this script, the objective script now. So what we want to do is receive the signal somewhere else. So we want to know that the objective was reached. So we're going to do the same thing that we did for the hit signal with this slime. So if we play the game, nothing new is going to happen. We're just emitting a signal. It doesn't do anything yet. But if you notice, nothing happens. But when I hit the slime, clearly a signal is produced. And then we respond to that signal by resetting the game. That's what we happen to be doing in this case. So, okay. So let's respond to the signal in the same way that we did before. So I'm going to go over to the Planet Zero scene node again and click that. And I'm going to find the objective in the tree. So we added an instance of it earlier. It's the stairs that we're working with. What we're going to click on is the signal icon next to it. So that's this. So it'll show us the signals dock on the right-hand side. So if we click that, this will appear on the right. Now we're going to deal with our emitted signal reached. So let's double click that and we'll connect it to the planet node. So we'll connect that. You can see we already have the one that we used previously for when the castaway is hit. So we're just setting up a new one right now for when the objective is reached. So we double click that and we connected it. And we saw the function that was added to the script. So now we're going to add the end game behavior because they have reached the objective. The game is over. Okay, so for now, though, we don't have too much that we want to do. We don't have a lot of like notifications or indications or messaging or anything like that. We have all the same stuff that we already had. We just added something that terminates the game. So we can't do anything super fancy, but we can basically hide the player or indicate in some way that the game is over. So let's go ahead and do that. So when we reach the objective, I'm going to go ahead and copy this code here. Actually, I'll copy it manually so I don't get rid of it totally. But basically, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little to-do here, which I can search for later on. I can just search this keyword later and see if I have anything outstanding that I need to do. That's a common practice in development as well. But basically what we'll want to do eventually is we'll display a message that the game has ended. And we'll wait a little bit of time before doing that so it's clear to the player what's going on. But for now, we're just going to disable the castaway, which is the player character. Now, if we go to the castaway, how do we do that? In the editor. And we look at the script. If I search in here, disable, there's these words, but there's no function called disable to call. So we're going to have to create that function. Yeah, the way we'll kind of handle this is pretty simple, though. We just want to hide the player from view. And then we want to stop their collisions from happening as well. So those are the two main things that we want to do in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and add this function to the castaway script. Again, I'll just copy it and it'll be ready to go. So I just added it there amongst everything else. So now this is valid. It's going to call this, and we can see what happens when we play this. If anyone, by the way, has any questions or anything like that, has any notes or is wondering about anything, please feel free to jump in. I'm happy to answer anything, any kind. Okay, I'm just going to move these boxes, and you can see that when I enter the stairs, so we disappear. So we're gone, and that's the end of the game for now. So to play again, I would just have to replay the game. So, you know, I can keep doing this, and yeah, the player still disappears. So we have all the functionality working successfully that we built so far. So that's really good. One thing I wanted to show really quick is this layer and mask system for the collisions. If you go over to the inspector for the objective, you'll remember that I set the layer to 5, which is just a different layer from everything else. So we had the boxes that move, the slime, the obstacles, and the castaway, and then this objective layer that we just added. The masks represent all these layers, but it's like from the perspective of this objective. So what can the objective see that interacts with it? If I go ahead and add movable, let's see what happens. So if I go ahead and add that, and let's say I just go all the way around like this. So you'll see, like, if I do that, if the movable box interacts with the objective, now the game is completed, which is what I was kind of talking about before. Maybe that behavior is desired for you. It's totally reasonable to want to do that, but it's just something to keep in mind. That's why those layers are relevant. So notice here, until I actually come into contact with the objective, then now because I've reset the layers in the mask, the game isn't complete until I interact with it. Okay. So we're very nearly done. I would say the game can be completed at this point. I mean, it's just one level of this game, but we have a lot of building blocks here that would basically let you get started building puzzles. So I don't know how much time I'll spend on a puzzle because I want to show this last bit of stuff. So maybe what I can do is if I finish this last bit for displaying information to the player, splash text, then I might come back to the puzzle. But basically, I just wanted to talk a little bit about puzzle mechanics for this particular game, how you might build more puzzles, because effectively, what I would imagine for a game like this is once we have all these core mechanics, you would want to basically assemble different puzzles for the player to navigate through. And you could even introduce some of these mechanics as you go throughout the game. So like, for instance, the first level could just be, you know, just this tile map where you just have to walk around it and then find the staircase. The next level could add these little squares, which are just like the tile map. They're just boxes that you can't move, and then you'd have to navigate around them. Then you could introduce the moving box. And then finally, maybe you could introduce the slime as being the most difficult mechanic. And then you could start mixing them all together and do different things. But yeah, I don't have too much more to say. You know, if you've played games, you can kind of imagine what you would like to, how you would like to use these mechanics and things like that. That's definitely the more creative, the most creative aspect, I think, of the game design itself. So I would kind of leave that up to you if you want to do that exercise now that you would have all your building blocks. So yeah, with these remaining bit, I want to show you how to basically display messages, because that's going to be pretty important, right? You probably want to tell your player certain things about how they're playing the game. I'm not going to say this is necessarily the way I would want the game to work with the messaging system, but it just gives a variety of messages that you can work with, and they're flexible. So, as we know, the player can complete the game now, but we don't have any really good indication that the game is over. I mean, we disappear the player, but that's not super helpful necessarily. We want to give them some really meaningful indication that feels good. So we're going to add a splash screen. So splash screens, typically what they're called. I think the reason they're called splash screens is just because it just covers the whole screen for a very short period of time. I guess that being the splash. That's the best excuse I can come up with for it. The way we're going to do this is with a new scene called based on a canvas layer. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So we're going to go to scene, new scene. I'm going to click other node, and I'm going to search for a canvas layer. So click that, and I'm going to rename it to splash. And then what we're going to do is basically use labels to build up the text in the splash. So to display text, we're going to add our first label node just as a child of the splash screen. And I think this is, yeah, this works fine. Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click the plus, search for a label, double click it, go ahead and add it. In the right-hand side is where you're going to add your text for your label. You don't have to worry so much about this because we're going to modify the text with script logic, but you can go ahead and initialize it with some text if you want to see how it's going to look inside of the viewport. Since we're starting probably with the title screen, I'm going to go ahead and add the title of our game. So I'm going to call it Space Castaway. Actually, I'm going to say Space Castaway like this. I'm going to set a few properties on this text, this label, so that things are kind of consistent, and we'll take a look at those. Yeah, so I'm going to, well, yeah. So let's go ahead and do that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to center the text. That won't really make a difference here because the label is, like, the text is filling the size of the label. But if we move the label like this, you can see the difference it starts to make. So if you left align it, if you center align it, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and, oh, I can't undo that because I haven't saved. That's why I can't undo that. Okay. Well, I'm going to leave it like that, and I'll go ahead and save it so that I can undo things. All right, so I'm going to center align it. I'm going to make it always uppercase. That way, if I forget to uppercase something, I think I'll like the way that looks. So, but it's just something that you're able to do. It's kind of nice. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this up because, as you can see, it's a bit small. It's not, the text is not that big, right, as it is. So I'm going to go down here to control. I'm going to click rect, which is the rectangle for the text. And I'm going to scale it probably about 3. Looks good. Yeah. So I think that looks pretty good as far as scaling goes. The last thing we're going to do for this is align it into the center of the level frame. So we want to make sure that when the level loads, the text is centered and it looks nice. The way we're going to do that is with this layout key here. So I'm going to do H center wide. I think that will work, kind of, not really, but we can almost do it. Basically, I'm just going to align it with the edge here, which is pretty close. Yeah, I think that looks good. And then let's see if there's anything else. That's right. It's going to align with this anchor. Okay, one thing you can do also that I just realized that I feel like is a bit easier. If we just use grid snap, that will let us align with pixels. And then I think makes it a bit easier to kind of deal with. So I'm just going to align it kind of manually. And I know this is the center, so I think that's better. Yeah, that's as good as I think I'd want it to be. Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. So that's pretty much aligned as far as text goes. You can also, by the way, change the font, but the Godot engine isn't going to provide you with any fonts, which is kind of annoying. So what you got to do is just basically go download a font file. They're called TTF files. And then you can load the font by going to theme overrides and then fonts. And then you'll load it like this. So it's only looking for these file types for some reason, but in the documentation I read online, you can load a TTF file. So it should be okay. All right, so we've got the color, we've got the text set up. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to set the color for the text. So we'll set a font color. We'll just make it white. So 6 Fs in hexadecimal color kind of ruling is white. So you can see that went ahead and set that. All right, that's the last thing I'm going to do for a text. Now I'm going to add a color rect node. So the problem with this text currently is that it's just text. There's no background. So if we were to display this in our game, it would actually show the level underneath it, which would be very confusing. So we want to have basically a background behind this text to display underneath it. So we'll add a color rect node as a child for the splash background. And we're going to move the node before the label node so that it actually appears behind the text. This is a bit of an annoyance. I've run into this a couple times in Godot. I don't know why Godot works this way. I guess I kind of understand it maybe a bit. I'm going to go ahead and change the color for this. Okay. If you'll notice, I'm going to go ahead and drag it all the way out. Or actually, one thing you can do, you can just click layout and do full rect. And that should align it perfectly. Yeah, with the complete viewport. So you'll notice that the text is totally obscured. Yeah, the way to fix this is to move this node, like not as a child, but like that. So if you just make it the parent, or it's sorry, it's not a parent, it's still a sibling of the label. It just happens before the label. And then that fixes it. Yeah, I wish I could explain why that works the way it does, but I'm not super clear on why it does, why they made it work that way. But it appears to work. So I chose black and white. You could obviously choose different colors for your text and your background. But yeah, I've filled the background there. So this splash is ready to go as far as just the layout and design. So what we want to do now is we want to time the display of the splash. So basically this splash, we only want it to occur for a limited amount of time before the game begins, and then a limited amount of time when the game ends, or the player loses the game, for example. So I'm going to add a timer node. So I'm going to click here, timer. I'm going to create this timer. And this you can add anywhere within. It doesn't matter if it's top or bottom because this node isn't being rendered. So we'll limit the display time of the splash this way. And two things we need to do really quick for this. We're going to make the wait time 2. And we're going to make it a one-shot timer. So what that means is basically if I start the timer, it's going to basically elapse for 2 seconds and then it'll stop. If you don't set this to one shot, what will happen is that the timer will keep repeating every 2 seconds or 4 seconds or something like that. I mean, that can be a desirable behavior, but for our case, we just want the timer to elapse and then complete. So it's just a one shot with a wait time of 2 seconds, which you can also play with. All right, so I'm going to save that. And yet, let's try to basically get this splash screen to display our game start information. So we're going to set up a signal, which means that we want a script for this splash. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to add a script. So it's a splash.gd. I'm going to create this. And I'm going to add a signal really quick called game start. Or start game, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. The next thing that I need to do is basically set up everything that I'm going to need to use to run the splash. So the splash needs to basically appear with a message in the background. We need to be able to set the message that we're displaying. We need to be able to time the duration of the splash. So it needs to splash for the duration of the timer. And then it needs to stop. So it needs to disappear afterwards. So the way that we're going to do that is by basically setting up a method. So a method to handle all of these responsibilities from the outset. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this content here. So I'm going to take it over to the script and just paste it. So I have a reference to message here because I renamed it. I'm going to go ahead and rename it now, but it doesn't matter. You could simply just use the word label here. If you don't want to rename it, it doesn't matter. So what this is going to do is just basically display the rectangle, the black rectangle in the background. It'll display the message and then it'll start the timer. And that's what this is meant to do. So that's getting us started. Now what we need to do is basically close things up. So when the splash is done, we need to finish everything. We're going to use the timer to know when to do that because we don't want to close everything until the timer has elapsed. So we're going to connect a signal from the timer, which is going to tell us that it's done, it's finished, it's elapsed, the amount of time that we wanted to pass has passed. So I'm going to go over to the timer node and I find this timeout signal. So the timeout signal is the indication that the timer's elapsed. I'm going to double click it and I'm going to connect it to the splash parent. So basically the parent splash is looking into its children, one of which is the timer, and saying, hey, let me know when you elapsed. I'm going to make a function called onTimerTimeout that basically will get called. This code will get executed when the timer finishes. So you see we're starting the timer here with this function, or we're going to be able to do that with this function. And then we have this other function to follow up on that. Okay, so we did all of this. Now I'm just going to copy this content again and just paste it right here. So basically, this is what the timer, this is what will happen when the timer elapses. We're going to hide all of that content. So we show it. So pops up on the screen, start the timer, okay, countdown. The countdown is done. Okay, hide everything and then resume the game, like start the game. So that's what we've got so far. Okay, then what we want to do is make this usable for all different contexts. So I just talked about basically starting the game with the splash screen. So you turn it on, the splash screen comes up, you see the message, it looks great. Then it closes and you begin the game. That's one usage of the splash screen. Another usage, which I think we'll go ahead and execute on, would be when you die. So if you die, we probably want to restart the game. You probably want to try again. So we need to display something there. Another use case would be if you lost or if you won the game. So if the game ends, we want a splash screen that doesn't ever go away, because that's it. That's all there is. So let's try to implement those with the following code. So for starting the game, I'm just going to copy this section and kind of go through it. For starting the game, we're basically going to set the message text. So you'll see that I'm setting it to the same thing that I initialized it with here, Space Castaway. It's the name of our game. We call this method display and countdown. So basically set the text, start the splash, run it. Then we have this code here, which is a yield. So what this code is basically saying is stop the game from doing anything else. Don't move until the timer is done. So the idea here is we don't want to, like, the player to be able to control different things while we're waiting to start the game. We just want them to read the message. So even if they move arrow keys and things like that, we don't want to listen to it. So that's what this yield will allow us to do. The yield will basically wait until this timer has elapsed. It means that no other, what would be called threads, can execute code in the background. I mean, certain threads will continue working. Obviously, the game is still rendering graphics and things like this for us. And then finally, what we want to do is obviously start the game. So we'll emit the signal indicating like, hey, the splash is over. We're good to go. We've displayed the message to the player. You can go ahead and start the game. This is what we'll use in our level to initialize everything as we've been doing. Just we'll wait until the splash is done. All right. The other scenario kind of came up with, and by the way, if there are any questions at all, yeah, don't hesitate to ask or interrupt or anything like that. Happy to clarify anything. The other kind of scenario I came up with is if we hit the slime. So we hit the slime, the player gets hurt, we lose the game. We want to basically update the text to say game over. We'll display that, and then we'll just start the game again. So we'll let the player retry, and we'll just call this same method. So it can just show the same splash again. Maybe if you were being really picky, you maybe wouldn't display the text again for the title. I don't know. I'm not that picky about it, but I guess you could just have this part here if you really wanted to be picky about it. But it's totally up to you. In fact, maybe you could just have this, I think. Yeah, instead of start game. You could mess with that. Okay. And then finally, the other scenario is to end the game completely. So they won the game. There's nothing else to do. So just display a splash. We're not going to use the helper that we made to display and count down because we don't want the timer to elapse and hide everything. We just want to show the splash with the new message that you escaped. You're no longer a castaway. You survived or you escaped, whatever. Okay, so this is our script. We're done there. Now what we want to do is we want to actually splash this. So currently this splash scene, it does nothing. We haven't added it to the level or anything. If we play the game, nothing happens with the splash. We can hit a slime. Everything is still doing the same thing it was already doing. And that's because we didn't add the scene to the game. So we need to add the scene to our level. And connect it, of course. So I'm going to make a child instance of Splash on the Planet Zero scene. I'm going to use the little chain icon, find the splash, and go ahead and open that. Now, if we look in the 2D viewport, just keep in mind, you know, it's totally like eclipsed the level. If you are annoyed by that, what you can do is, oh, whoops, let me undo that. Is this what I want? Object children, ability to be selected. Oh, it won't let me group select it. Okay. Anyway, I think what you could do with the splash is maybe put it up here. No. Honestly, I'm not sure what to do to make it not look like this in the template view, but either way, it's, well, I guess it will do that actually. So what you're going to do is basically just connect everything and let the splash function. I'd be curious to see if you can make it not do this. Well, you can just hide it, I think. Can you do that? I'm not sure. Well, I don't know how to make it not visible. That would be something to look into because this is pretty annoying if you want to edit your level. In any event, we're going to go ahead and connect it to the level and it'll hide it and all that stuff that we want to do automatically. So basically, we're going to revise all of the initialization code that we've been using in our script. So we already have all of this in here. We just want to change what happens when it happens. So the first part that we want to edit is this ready function. So the ready function happens when the game loads. Currently, what we do is we just begin the game, we just initialize. So instead of doing that, what we want to do now is actually splash. And we will call start game. So splash start game. Okay, that will start this opening game sequence with the splash, which will then emit the signal to start the game from its end. So really what we want to do is splash and then respond to that signal. So let's go over here to the nodes, the node tab, and we'll take a look at our splash, double click on game start and connect it to the Planet Zero this way. Now what we can do is respond to the game start with the initialize call like we had before. Okay, so let's try that, just that, and let's see what happens. So we get our splash and it disappears after 2 seconds. So this is starting to look more like a real game. So you load it, it has a title, it goes away, and then you can play the game. So that's kind of cool. Let's handle some of the other aspects of this. And we can just kind of copy this content in. So instead of just initializing and resetting when the castaway gets hit, for example, by the slime, you know, currently it just resets it. You could leave it like that if you like how that works. If you like that the player just immediately goes back to where they started. I kind of like it in a way. It's really quick. It means you can retry pretty quickly, but maybe you want a stronger indication that they lost in that scenario and they need to retry. So what you could do is basically use our code endpoint that we added for splash retry game. So if we save that, it loads the game with the title, and then if they hit the slime, it shows them again just that they got to retry. You know, so this is one way to kind of do that. I don't mind that. I kind of like it. I guess I don't know why it's not setting this message text. Something fishy is going on. that we might not have time to debug, but maybe if you're working on your end, that's something you can debug. The message text should be getting reset to this game over, and then we call display and countdown. But I'm not sure why. Yeah, I'm not sure why exactly it's just showing space castaway still. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but that could be something to debug. Yeah. The last thing is obviously to conclude the game. So I'm going to copy this function here, this function content. So when they reach the objective, like we mentioned before, what we wanted to do is add some extra content. So we wanted to wait some time to display the complete message and then display the message. So we're going to delete that little comment and we'll go ahead and add the code that we've found here. Oops, go ahead and copy that again. Sorry for the back and forth. So basically, we're going to use a quick timer here. So we're not going to add a timer node. In Godot, you can basically access the scene tree and then create a timer on it, just an arbitrary timer for 2 seconds. We're going to do the same thing that we did here in this splash script, which is to yield. So wait for the timer to complete. We're basically going to freeze the game to show them that they won. And then we're going to display the indication that they won through this end game message. So you escaped will be written and updated. So let's go ahead and play that. So space castaway appears on the screen. We try to reach our objective however we want. Okay, move this box down. So there, the information is updated, and that's the end of the game. And it's also far over our time, but I'm glad we reached the end there, because that really is the end. So we ended our game. It's playable. It's just one level, but I hope maybe someone out there finds this design pretty interesting or quirky, or maybe you, Craig, are motivated to work with this game, or maybe you just want to learn enough to kind of get started on making your own game. Either way, this is pretty end to end a little game, which is pretty cool. So if you did work on this, you're watching out there, you should definitely feel pretty proud, because doing this kind of thing, it's really not that hard. It just takes a lot of time. So once you do it, you can make all kinds of games, because you probably understand a lot more about making them. So yeah, I think that's kind of it. I just wanted to conclude and say, definitely don't stop there. If you feel like you're up for it, you can always make additions and changes and add features and things like that. Just keep in mind that the most important thing about making a game at this stage as an amateur or a beginner is just to actually make it and complete it, and then move on to the next game. So I think I said at the very beginning, if you have a game idea and you think it's a really good idea and you really want to make it and it's your dream game, do not make that game. Like, make a really tiny game first and finish it and see what it feels like to have made a game, encounter all of the problems, all of the frustrations that you have to deal with, debugging, little issues here and there. Get through all of that, make one game like this one, and then say, okay, I've made a game. I know now how I should make my dream game. And then you can go work on that game. But definitely don't, because you'll get really discouraged if you just think like you're going to make your dream game at the outset. It's not going to be super easy. Even this game changed a couple of times, 2-3 times throughout the process. So yeah, I just wrote some ideas, I guess, but really that's it. Next time, for the next series, I mean, we'll be starting a new series, but I'll definitely go ahead and ask and see if anyone out there has been working on a game or anything like that. Feel free to bring in something for the next Learn to Code series, and we'll stop and talk about it, because that'd be really cool to see if anyone out there is working on a game. I would love to see it, no matter what game engine you're using.
Thank you so much, Paige. That I think it was awesome. And you're gonna still have office hours, right, through the month? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll
okay,
have
every
office hours.
Monday.
Yes, every Monday. So if you have questions about gaming or game design, sorry, I don't really know too much about gaming, but I can definitely help you write programming code for your game, or yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
awesome. Okay, so we will come back on May with a new series. So stay tuned. Thank you so much, Paige, for everything you done so far. I think every session was like amazing. And don't forget the office hours, and we here at the library.
Yeah. Thanks for
Okay.
joining. And yeah, have a great night. Thanks,
Yep.
everyone.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Greg, for
Thanks,
joining
Greg.
us tonight.